The Sunday they divided Grandpa Earl's land, nobody called me until it was already done. I drove 40 minutes to Renata's house, thinking I was there to grieve with family. Instead, I walked into a dining room where my cousin Derek had a property map spread across the table, color-coded in highlighter, with everyone's name written in neat little boxes. My name was not on that map. Renata looked up and said, "We kept it simple, Victoria. You understand." I did not cry. I did not argue. I did not even sit down. What none of them knew, what Renata had no idea about as she smiled across that table, was that the deed to all 47 acres had quietly been in my name for 3 years. Their signatures meant nothing. Their colored boxes meant nothing. The moment they filed that paperwork downtown, they were going to trigger the one clause that left every single one of them with nothing. Before I tell you the rest, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been written out of something that was already yours. My grandfather Earl Hayes was not a complicated man, but he was a precise one. He kept a leather-bound notebook in the front pocket of his flannel shirt, the same green flannel he wore every single day from October through March, regardless of the weather. In that notebook he wrote down everything: fence repair dates, seed orders, the name of every person who had ever borrowed money from him, and whether or not they paid it back. He had been keeping that notebook since 1971, and by the time I was old enough to read, he had filled 43 of them. I know this because he showed me. He never showed Renata. I grew up understanding that in the Hayes family, there were two sets of rules. There were the rules for the people Renata approved of, and there were the rules for everyone else. Renata was my father Gerald's younger sister, and somewhere along the way, she had decided that managing the family meant owning it. She organized the holiday dinners. She coordinated the hospital visits. She was the one who called you when someone died. And she was the one who decided how long you were allowed to cry about it before she changed the subject. She was generous with the people who agreed with her. She had a long memory for the ones who did not. My mother had not agreed with her. My mother was a quiet woman from New Haven named Patricia, a kindergarten teacher who wore her hair in a braid and brought homemade cornbread to every family gathering for 11 years. Renata had never once acknowledged the cornbread. When my mother and father divorced, Renata was on the phone with Gerald within the hour, and by the following Thanksgiving, it was as if Patricia Hayes had never existed at all. I was 17 when my parents divorced. I stayed with my father, which meant I stayed inside Renata's orbit, which meant I learned very early how to be invisible in a room full of people who shared my last name. I was not the favorite. That was Derek, Renata's oldest, broad-shouldered and loud, who had inherited her talent for walking into a room and immediately identifying who was useful. Derek had his mother's smile. He used it the same way she did, right before he asked you for something. Then there was Mason, Derek's younger brother, who followed Derek the way a shadow follows a person in the late afternoon. Always slightly behind, always in the same shape. Mason was not cruel on his own. He simply did not resist cruelty when it was convenient. My father Gerald existed somewhere in between. He was not a bad man. He was a weak one, which is sometimes harder to forgive. He loved Earl sincerely, I believe that. But he loved comfort more, and Renata had always been the one who controlled the temperature of the room, and then there was Grandpa Earl. Earl Hayes had farmed 47 acres in Westchester County for 51 years. He had bought the land in 1973 for what he always called a number that would make you laugh now, and he had spent 5 decades improving it: drainage systems, access roads, a small barn he built himself over 2 summers with lumber he milled on site. The land sat on a gentle slope about 4 miles from the county line, and in autumn, when the leaves turned, it looked like something out of a painting that people pretend to understand in museums. Developers had been calling him since 2009. He had never once returned the call. Earl did not trust Renata with money. He never said this to me directly. He didn't have to. I was the one he called when he got a letter from the county assessor's office that he didn't understand. I was the one sitting across from him at the kitchen table when he spread out 3 different refinancing offers and asked me which one was trying to cheat him. I was 26 then, 2 years out of law school, working at a small real estate firm in Stamford, and he would watch me read with the focused patience of a man who had learned that waiting was a form of intelligence. "You understand the words," he told me once. "The others understand the money. There's a difference." I had taken the bar exam on a Thursday and called him from the parking lot of the testing center before I called my father. He was the one who asked me what kind of law I wanted to practice. When I told him real estate, he was quiet for a moment and then said, "Good. Dirt doesn't lie." I did not realize until much later how carefully he had been watching me build a career around the thing he valued most in the world. What I know now, what I have gone over in my mind more times than I can count, is that Earl Hayes had been planning for a long time. He had watched his family in the way that quiet people watch, not with suspicion but with clarity. He had seen what Renata was. He had seen what Gerald was willing to become when the right pressure was applied. He had watched Derek and Mason and understood that they were their mother's instruments. And he had looked at me, the one who had been written out of the Thanksgiving seating chart, the one who brought a store-bought pie because no one had told her she was invited until the morning of, the one who sat at the kids' table at 30 years old because Renata had simply never updated the arrangement. And he had made a decision. 3 years before he died, he asked me to meet him at my office, not at the house, not at the diner on Route 22 where we sometimes had coffee. My office on a Tuesday afternoon with the door closed. He came in wearing the green flannel. He sat down across from my desk the way clients sit, straight-backed, deliberate. He put a manila envelope on the desk between us. "I need you to explain this to me before I sign it," he said. It was a deed of transfer. His name on one line, mine on another. 47 acres, legally described in full, with the parcel number and the county recording information already filled in. I looked at him across the desk for a long moment. "Grandpa," I said. "Read it first," he said. "Then talk." I read it. Every line. The legal description was correct. The transfer language was clean. There were no conditions attached, no life estate reservation, no clawback clause. It was a straightforward conveyance, the kind I drafted for clients twice a week. When I finished, I set it down. "You understand what this means?" I said. It was not a question. "I understand exactly what it means," he said. "Do you?" I told him I did. I told him that once this was signed and recorded, the land belonged to me, not to his estate, not to probate, not to any will that could be contested or rewritten after he was gone. I told him that if he did this, there was nothing Renata could do about it, legally, as long as he was of sound mind at the time of signing. He nodded slowly. "And am I?" "Yes," I said. "You clearly are." He picked up my pen from the desk. He signed. I called my supervising partner into witness. We had it notarized that same afternoon and filed with the Westchester County Clerk's office before 5 o'clock. He stood up when it was done, tucked the green flannel back into his waistband, and picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. "Don't tell anyone," he said. "Not yet. How long?" I asked. He thought about it. "Until they give you a reason to." He died 14 months later. A Tuesday morning in September, quietly, in the same house where he had lived for 40 years. I got the call from Gerald, who was crying in that broken way men cry when they have not practiced it. I sat in my car in the parking garage under my office building for 20 minutes before I could drive, and I waited. The way he had taught me to wait. The way he had taught me that patience was not passivity, it was preparation. I waited 3 months. Right up until the Sunday Renata spread that color-coded map across her dining room table and told me, with her most practiced smile, that they had kept it simple. The invitation had come by text. That should have told me everything. It arrived on a Saturday evening at 6:47 p.m. I remember because I was heating up soup and my phone was face up on the counter. Renata's name on the screen. The message was 11 words. "Family meeting tomorrow at 2. Earl's estate matters. Please come. No, please call me. No, I thought we should talk first." 11 words, a period at the end, and nothing else. I texted back that I would be there. She did not respond. I told myself on the drive over that it was probably a preliminary conversation. An overview of what the estate contained, what the probate process would look like, who was handling what. I had been through this with clients. It was rarely clean, but it followed a structure, and structure was something I understood. I had not told anyone about the deed. Not my assistant, not my partner at the firm, not my closest friend Claire, who knew almost everything about my life and had strong opinions about most of it. I had kept it the way Earl had asked me to keep it, folded into the back of a fireproof file box in my office closet behind the hanging folders for closed cases, in a manila envelope with nothing written on the outside. I pulled into Renata's driveway at 1:58 p. Her house was a colonial on a cul-de-sac in Bronxville, 4 bedrooms, freshly painted shutters, a flagstone path that she had installed the previous spring and mentioned at least twice per family gathering. Gerald's car was already there. Derek's truck was parked at an angle across the end of the driveway the way Derek always parked, as if traffic laws were a matter of personal interpretation. Mason's sedan was on the street. I sat in my car for 30 seconds, not because I was nervous. Because I wanted to notice the feeling of the moment before I walked into it. The bare trees, the gray November sky, the smell of someone's fireplace a few houses down. I have learned to do this, to mark the before so that later the after makes sense. I rang the doorbell. Derek answered, which surprised me. Renata usually answered her own door. "Hey," he said, not warmly. The way you say hey to someone you have mentally already finished with. I followed him through the foyer and into the dining room. The map was already on the table. It was a printed aerial photograph of Earl's land. The 47 acres rendered in crisp satellite detail, the tree lines and the access road, and the old barn visible from above. Someone had overlaid it with colored boundary lines in red marker. 3 sections clearly delineated, red, blue, green. Each section had a name written in block letters in the corresponding color: Dirk Meissen, Gerald. I stood in the doorway and looked at it for what felt like a long time, but was probably 4 seconds. Renata was at the head of the table. She was wearing a blazer, which I noted because Renata did not typically wear blazers to family meetings. She had a folder open in front of her, printed pages, organized with paper clips. Gerald was to her left, not looking at me. Mason was across from him, picking at the sleeve of his sweater. Derek moved past me and took the seat at the far end, pulling the map slightly toward himself as he sat. There was one empty chair. It was not at the table. It was against the wall, slightly behind, and to the left of where Mason was sitting. A dining chair that had been moved out of position and placed apart, the way you seat someone who is present but not participating. Renata looked up. "Victoria," she said. "Good, you made it." "Sit wherever." I did not sit. I stayed in the doorway. "What is this?" I asked. I meant the map. I meant the chair against the wall. I meant all of it. Renata folded her hands on top of her folder. "We've been working with an estate attorney for the past 6 weeks," she said. "We've come up with a division that reflects Dad's wishes and keeps the land in the family. We wanted to walk you through it. Walk me through it." As if I were a neighbor they were informing, not a granddaughter being told that her name had been subtracted from a family. "His wishes," I said. "Dad always said he wanted the land to stay with the boys." Renata said, "Derek and Mason have been out there every summer since they were kids. Gerald has been managing the property maintenance for years." It made sense to keep it in that line. Gerald had not managed the property maintenance for years. Gerald had driven out there 3 times in the last decade, and each time he had called Earl afterward to ask whether he had done enough. I knew this because Earl had told me, without cruelty, in the way he reported facts. "And me," I said. Renata's expression did not change. It was the expression she had practiced for situations like this. Not unkind exactly, but sealed. The expression of a person who has already decided and is now managing the announcement. "Victoria," she said, with a small exhale, as if she had hoped I would make this easier. "You have your career. You have your life in Stamford. You're not tied to the land the way the boys are." Dad understood that. Across the table, Derek was looking at the map. Mason was still picking at his sleeve. Gerald was looking at his hands. "Dad is gone," I said. "You don't get to speak for him anymore." Renata's chin lifted slightly. "I was his daughter, and I was his granddaughter," I said. The one he called when he had a question he actually needed answered. The room went very still. Not the good kind of still. The kind that happens right before someone raises their voice. Derek looked up from the map for the first time. "Look," he said, in the tone he used when he wanted to sound reasonable. "Without being reasonable, nobody's trying to cut you out. There just wasn't a way to divide 47 acres into 4 equal parts that made geographic sense. The access road runs through the middle section. You'd have to cross someone else's parcel to get to any standalone piece. It's a practical issue." He had rehearsed this. I could hear it, the smoothness of it, the way the logistics arrived too quickly, too fully formed. "So the solution," I said slowly, "was to give me nothing." "The solution," Renata said, "was to keep it clean." She opened the folder and slid a single sheet of paper across the table toward me. It was a document, a 1-page release. The kind attorneys draft when they want someone to forfeit a claim without having to say the word forfeit. I could see my name in the signature block at the bottom. I did not pick it up. I looked at my father. Gerald was finally looking back at me. His expression was the one I had known my whole life. The one that said, "I know this is wrong, but I have already decided not to fight it." the expression of a man who had chosen the warm chair so many times that he no longer noticed the cold. I looked at him for a moment, just long enough for him to understand that I saw him clearly. Then I looked at Renata. I need to think about it, I said. Renata's posture relaxed, almost imperceptibly. She thought that meant she had won. People who are used to getting what they want often mistake a pause for a surrender. Of course, she said. Take a few days. I picked up my coat from where I had laid it over the empty chair against the wall. I put it on. I picked up my bag. Thank you for including me, I said. I said it without expression, without inflection, in the same voice I use when I am reading aloud from a contract in a closing meeting. Factual. Completed. I walked back through the foyer, past the flagstone path, to my car. I did not look back at the house. I did not need to. I already knew what was behind me. What I was focused on was what came next. I sat in my car for 6 minutes before I started the engine, not because I was falling apart. I want to be clear about that. I was not crying in Renata's driveway. I was not shaking. I was not cycling through the kind of hot, disorganized anger that makes you send messages you regret. I was sitting because I needed to let the information settle into the correct place. The way you let concrete cure before you put weight on it. The heater came on. Outside, the cul-de-sac was quiet. A woman 2 houses down was raking leaves into a pile that the wind kept undoing. She raked without frustration, steadily, as if the wind were just another variable she had accounted for. I watched her for a moment, then I put the car in reverse. On the drive back to Stamford, I did not call anyone. I turned the radio off after about 4 minutes because the noise felt wrong, too casual for what I was thinking. I drove in silence on the Hutchinson River Parkway, with both hands on the wheel, and let my mind go through it systematically, the way I would go through a contract with a problem buried in it. What had actually happened in that room? Renata had presented a division of property as though it were a conclusion already reached, a formality being communicated rather than a decision being made. She had a document prepared with my signature line already printed. She had a folder, a blazer, a chair placed against the wall. She had Derek rehearsed and Gerald subdued, and Mason absent in the way that people are absent when they are present, but have agreed to contribute nothing. She had done all of this without once asking whether Earl had left any instructions of his own. That was the thing that struck me hardest. There in the car on the parkway, with the bare trees going past. She had not mentioned a will. She had not mentioned probate. She had spoken about Earl's wishes, as though they were hers to interpret, as though his death had transferred his intentions into her custody along with everything else. Either she had looked and found nothing that contradicted her plan, or she had not looked at all, because it had not occurred to her that there was anything to find. I thought about Earl sitting across from my desk 3 years ago. The green flannel, the manila envelope, the way he had said, "Don't tell anyone," with the calm specificity of a man who had already mapped out every variable. He had known. He had known exactly how this would go. The dining room, the color-coded map, the chair against the wall. He had known, because he had watched these people for decades, and he understood that the moment he was gone, the room would rearrange itself according to Renata's geometry. He had simply made sure that the room did not own what Renata thought it did. I got back to Stamford at 4:15. I parked in the garage under my building and took the elevator to the 7th floor and walked to my office and unlocked it. On Sundays, the building was quiet. The kind of quiet that amplifies small sounds, the hum of the HVAC. My heels on the hardwood, the click of the lock. I went to the closet. I moved the hanging folders to one side. I pulled out the fireproof box, set it on my desk, and opened it with the small key I keep on my keyring between my car key and my apartment fob. Inside, tax documents, a copy of my bar admission certificate, the lease for my apartment, 2 closed client files I had kept for reference, and a manila envelope with nothing written on the outside. I took out the envelope and set it on the desk. I did not open it immediately. I made coffee first, the small machine on the credenza behind my desk that I keep stocked because I work late more often than I plan to. I made 1 cup and stood at the window for a moment, looking out at the parking structure across the street and the strip of gray sky above it. Then I sat down, set the cup to the side, and opened the envelope. The deed was exactly as I remembered it. 4 pages, printed on standard bond paper, the legal description of the parcel running for a full page and a half in the dense, standardized language that means nothing to most people, and means everything once you understand it. Earl Hayes, grantor. Victoria Ann Hayes, grantee, 47 acres in fee simple, no conditions, no reservations. The notary stamp was on page 4. The date, September 14th, 3 years ago. Below it, the recording stamp from the Westchester County Clerk's office. Filed the same day. Document number printed in the clerk's ink. I read it twice. Not because I had forgotten what it said. Because I needed to feel the weight of it again. The specific solidity of a legal instrument that has been properly executed and recorded. In real estate law, recording is everything. A deed that exists but has not been recorded is vulnerable. A deed that has been recorded creates a public record. It becomes part of the chain of title, visible to anyone who searches the index, senior to any subsequent transfer. Whatever Renata filed, whatever Derek and Mason signed, whatever document she had slid across that dining room table, it would be junior to this. Subordinate. Legally ineffective as to the property, they were not dividing Earl's land. They were dividing land that already belonged to me. I set the deed down and picked up my coffee. It had cooled slightly, which was fine. I drank half of it and thought about the next step. With the same methodical attention I give to any file that has moved from a planning phase into an active one. I needed to verify that the recording was still intact, not because I doubted it, but because diligence is diligence and I do not skip steps. I needed to know exactly where Renata's probate petition stood and whether she had already filed with the surrogate's court. I needed to understand the timeline before I moved. I picked up my phone and called my assistant Denise. She did not answer. It was a Sunday, so I left her a voicemail. Denise, it's Victoria. I need you to pull something first thing tomorrow. Run a title search on a parcel in Westchester County. I'll text you the parcel number tonight. Also check the surrogate's court docket for anything filed under the estate of Earl T. Hayes, deceased, in the last 90 days. I need everything you find on my desk by 9. I ended the call and sat for a moment in the quiet office. Outside, the sky had gone fully dark. The parking structure across the street was lit in that flat, yellow-white light that makes everything look like a photograph of itself. I thought about the woman raking leaves in the wind, how she had not stopped, how she had simply continued, steadily, accounting for variables, doing the work. I thought about Earl in this same chair 3 years ago, watching me read. Dirt doesn't lie, he had said no. It does not. I texted Denise the parcel number, locked the deed back in the box, turned off the office light, and went home. Tomorrow, the work would begin. And I already knew how it ended. Denise was at her desk when I arrived at 8:45. She had been my assistant for 4 years, and one of the things I valued most about her was that she did not ask unnecessary questions. When I walked in and she handed me a folder without looking up from her screen, I understood that she had found something worth organizing into a folder, which meant the search had returned results, which meant everything was where I needed it to be. I took the folder to my office, closed the door, and sat down. She had pulled 2 documents. The first was the title search result, a printout from the county's online recording index, showing every instrument recorded against the parcel in the last 50 years. Deeds, mortgages, easements, tax liens, releases. The chain of title going back to 1973, when Earl had first purchased the land from a farming family named Kowalski, for a number that did in fact make me pause when I saw it. I ran my finger down the list. The second to last entry was Earl's original deed to himself, recorded in 1973. Clean title, no encumbrances other than a mortgage paid off in 1991. The last entry was dated September 14th, 3 years ago. Instrument type deed. Grantor, Earl Thomas Hayes. Grantee, Victoria Ann Hayes. Document number matching the stamp on my copy exactly. I sat with that for a moment. The quiet confirmation of something you already knew is its own particular feeling, not surprise, but a settling, like the last piece of a foundation being poured. The second document Denise had pulled was the surrogate's court docket. Renata had filed a probate petition 11 days after Earl's funeral. She had listed herself as the proposed administrator of his estate. The petition included an inventory of assets, bank accounts, personal property, the farmhouse on the parcel, and, listed on page 3 as the primary asset, real property, Westchester County, approximately 47 acres, estimated value $2.1 million. She had listed it as part of the estate. She had listed land that was not in the estate. Land that had left Earl's ownership 3 years before he died, transferred cleanly and recorded publicly in a system she could have searched from her laptop on any given afternoon. She had never searched it. It had never occurred to her to look. I set the docket printout down and opened my desk drawer. In the back, Behind a box of paper clips and a spare phone charger was a business card I had put there 8 months ago and not thought about since. Jonathan Abreu, esque. He was a probate litigator I had met at a continuing education seminar in White Plains, sharp, methodical, with a reputation for being exceptionally difficult to outmaneuver once he was engaged on a case. I had taken his card because as I make a habit of collecting names I might need someday. I had not known then that I would need it for this. I called him at 9:15. He answered on the second ring, Jonathan Abreu. This is Victoria Hayes, I said. We met at the Clee in White Plains last spring. Real estate attorney Stamford, a brief pause. I remember. You asked the question about adverse possession and recording priority. That's right, I said. I have a situation I'd like to walk you through. It involves a probate petition that was filed against property that left the decedent's estate 3 years before death. Recorded deed, clean transfer, grantee is me. Another pause, shorter this time. I could hear him processing it. The specific quality of silence that a litigator has when they are recognizing the shape of something. The petitioner doesn't know about the deed, he said. It was not a question. She has not indicated any awareness of it. I said, she listed the property as an estate asset in her petition, and you have the original recorded deed in your possession. In my office. Yes, Victoria, he said, and I could hear something shift in his voice. A kind of focused attention that good attorneys get when a case is clean and they know it. That petition is going to have a problem. I know, I said. I'd like your help making sure that problem becomes visible. At the right moment, we met in his office in White Plains that Thursday. I brought the deed, the recording confirmation, the title search printout, and the probate docket. I laid them on his conference table in the order I would present them if I were making a closing argument, which is a habit I developed in law school and have never been able to break. Jonathan went through each document without speaking. He was the kind of reader who was fully present while reading. No nodding, no expressions, just complete absorption. When he finished, he stacked the papers neatly and looked at me. This is unambiguous, he said. The deed was recorded prior to death. The property never entered the estate. The petition misrepresents the asset inventory, whether intentionally or not. It was intentional, I said. He looked at me steadily. You believe the petitioner knew. I believe the petitioner organized a family meeting, had a division document prepared with my signature line already printed, and presented a color-coded map of property she had never verified. She had the right to divide. I paused. Whether she checked and ignored it or simply never checked, the effect is the same. She filed a petition with the court claiming an asset that does not belong to the estate. Jonathan was quiet for a moment. Outside his window, White Plains traffic moved slowly in the gray afternoon light. There's a potential fraud referral here, he said carefully. If we can establish that she had reason to know the property had been transferred and proceeded anyway. I have email correspondence, I said, from 3 weeks after the funeral. Renata sent a message to Gerald asking whether Earl had ever done anything with the deed on the Westchester property. Gerald replied that he didn't think so. Renata replied, good, let's keep it that way. I slid the printed email chain across the table. Jonathan read it. He read it again. Then he set it down and looked at me with the expression of a man who has just been handed the kind of document that changes the shape of a case entirely. She asked, he said. She asked, I confirmed. And when she received an answer that suited her, she stopped looking. The distinction mattered legally. It was the difference between negligent misrepresentation and something closer to deliberate suppression. She had possessed the impulse to check, received incomplete information, and chosen to treat that incomplete information as confirmation. In a probate court, with the right judge, that email was going to be very difficult to explain. Jonathan picked up a legal pad and uncapped his pen. Tell me everything, he said. From the beginning, I told him, all of it. The Tuesday afternoon 3 years ago, the green flannel, the deed on my desk, the notary, the filing. The Sunday meeting at Renata's house, the map, the chair against the wall, the release document with my name already in the signature block. The voicemail to Denise, the title search, the docket. He took notes in the precise, compressed handwriting of someone who has filled many legal pads over many years. When I finished, he set the pen down. Here is what I want you to do, he said. Nothing. For now. Do not respond to any communication from Renata or from her attorney, if she has engaged one. Do not tell anyone in your family what you have. Do not search the court docket again from any device connected to your work network. He paused. And if anyone invites you to any meeting about this estate, you go. I looked at him. You go, he repeated, and you say very little, and you let them believe they are further along than they are. I understood exactly what he meant. Renata had spent 40 years being the person who knew more than everyone else in the room. She had built her influence on information asymmetry, on being the one who had made the calls, done the organizing, established the facts before anyone else arrived. For once, I was the one who knew more, and I had learned from the best how to wait. The email from Renata arrived on a Wednesday 17 days after the meeting at her house. It came at 11:04 in the morning, and I know the exact time because I was in the middle of reviewing a purchase agreement for a client closing the following week, and my phone lit up on the desk beside me. I saw her name, set the purchase agreement face down, and read it. The subject line was, Earl Hayes Estate. Documentation required. The body of the email was 3 paragraphs, written in the careful, slightly formal register Renata used when she wanted to sound official without actually being official. She opened by referencing the family meeting and the division they had agreed upon. Agreed upon being her language, not mine, given that I had agreed to nothing and signed nothing. She noted that the estate attorney was moving forward with the probate process and that all parties needed to finalize their positions before the court filing advanced. The second paragraph was the one that mattered. She wrote that in order to proceed cleanly, she needed Victoria to sign the release document that had been presented at the meeting. She had attached a revised copy. She wrote that the release was a standard instrument, acknowledging that Victoria had no claim against the estate assets, which would allow the division to move forward without complication. The third paragraph was a deadline. She wanted the signed release returned within 10 business days. I read it twice. Then I forwarded it to Jonathan with a single line. See attached. 10-day deadline. Thoughts? He called me within the hour. Do not sign it, he said, which I had not needed to be told but appreciated hearing, stated plainly. Do not respond to it at all yet. Let the deadline pass. She'll escalate, I said. Yes, he said. Let her. I let the deadline pass. I did not respond to the email. I did not acknowledge receipt. I returned to the purchase agreement on my desk, and the 4 other active files that week, and the closing that ran 40 minutes long on Friday, because the buyer's lender had sent the wrong wire amount, and we had to hold everyone in the conference room while it was corrected. Life continued at its ordinary pace, which is one of the strange things about waiting. The way the world does not pause to accommodate the thing you are holding. Derek called on a Thursday evening, 12 days after Renata's email. I was making dinner. Pasta. Nothing elaborate, and I let it ring twice before I answered because I wanted to compose myself into the version of myself I needed to be for this call. Unhurried, slightly tired from a long week. Unremarkable. Hey, he said. The same hey as in Renata's doorway. The one that means you are already finished, Derek, I said. How are you? Good, good. A pause that was slightly too long. Hey, so Mom mentioned she sent you some paperwork. She did, I said. You get a chance to look at it? I did. Another pause. I stirred the pasta and said nothing. So what's the holdup? He said. The reasonable tone was still there, but thinner now, like paint applied over something that wasn't fully dry. It's a pretty simple document, Victoria. You're not giving anything up that you actually had. I want to pause here and tell you what it felt like to hear that sentence. You're not giving anything up that you actually had. Said by a man who was standing in a house that his grandfather had not left him, about land that his grandfather had quietly transferred to someone else 3 years before the conversation we were having. Said with the casual confidence of someone who had never considered that the floor beneath his position might not be solid. I did not tell him what I knew. I thought about Jonathan's instruction. Say very little, let them believe they are further along than they are, and I held it like a compass. I'm still thinking it through, I said. It's a legal document. I want to make sure I understand what I'm signing, Derek exhaled. It was the exhale of a man who has been told he has to be patient about something he has already decided is finished. It's pretty standard language, Victoria. Mom had an attorney draft it. I know, I said. That's why I want to read it carefully. He tried once more, a softer version of the same argument, something about family unity and not dragging things out, and I listened and made the appropriate sounds and told him I appreciated him calling. When we hung up, I stood at the stove for a moment, with the wooden spoon in my hand and the steam rising from the pot. Then I drained the pasta and ate my dinner. The second escalation came from Gerald. My father texted me on a Sunday afternoon, 10 days after Derek's call. The message was, Victoria, can we please talk about Grandpa's estate? I don't want this to become a problem between us. I stared at that message for a while. The particular sentence construction of it, I don't want this to become a problem, as though the problem were something I was creating by existing, by failing to sign a document surrendering land that was already mine, as though the inconvenience were mine to resolve rather than a consequence of what they had done. I called him back. He answered immediately, which told me he had been waiting. Dad, I said. Victoria. He sounded tired. Gerald had always sounded slightly tired, even when there was nothing to be tired about. I I want you to understand that this isn't personal. It's complicated, with the land and the access road, and Renata has been handling everything. Renata has been handling everything, I said quietly. Yes, he paused. She knows what she's doing. She has an attorney. I know she does. Victoria. His voice shifted into something more careful, the way it shifted when he was about to say something he had rehearsed. There's nothing there for you to fight over. Dad didn't leave anything specifically to you. Renata checked. I let the silence sit for a moment. Renata checked. I said, yes. She went through everything after the funeral. The will, the accounts, everything. And she found nothing, I said. She found nothing, he said. I looked out my apartment window at the parking lot below, where a man was loading grocery bags into the back of a minivan with the focused efficiency of someone on a schedule. 1 bag, 2 bags, 3. The mundane patience of ordinary life. Okay, Dad, I said, I hear you. He exhaled with relief, which was almost painful to listen to. So you'll sign the release? I'll think about it, I said. He started to say something else, but I told him I had to go. I had a call in a few minutes, which was not true, but it was a clean exit, and we said goodbye. I texted Jonathan immediately after. Father called. Says Renata checked after the funeral and found nothing. Consistent with the email chain, Jonathan replied within minutes. Good. Confirms she conducted a search and reached an incorrect conclusion. That matters for intent. When you come in Thursday, bring the original deed. I want to review the recording stamp one more time before we file our response. Our response. Those 2 words had a particular weight to them. Not my response to Renata, not a defensive maneuver, not a request for reconsideration, a legal response. Filed with a court. By an attorney who had described the petition as having a problem. I thought about Renata in her blazer at the head of her dining room table with her color-coded folder, the careful architecture of her plan laid out in front of her. The way she had exhaled when I said I needed to think about it. The way the room had relaxed, collectively, because they had interpreted a pause as a concession. I thought about how long she had operated from the assumption that she was always the most prepared person in any room she organized. I thought about how much of her confidence rested on the belief that she had checked and found nothing. She had checked. She had looked at a portion of the record and decided it confirmed what she already believed. She had not pulled the full title search. She had not run the grantor-grantee index for the 3 years before Earl's death. She had found the absence of a will that mentioned the land and concluded that the land was therefore hers to distribute. The difference between what she had searched and what Denise had pulled on that Monday morning was 45 minutes and the knowledge of where to look. 45 minutes that Renata had not spent. 45 minutes that had cost her everything she thought she was going to get. On Thursday, I brought Jonathan the original deed. He held it carefully, the way lawyers hold documents that are about to change something, and reviewed the recording stamp one final time. It's clean, he said. It's always been clean, I said. He nodded and set it down. We file Monday. Outside his window, the afternoon was gray and still and entirely ordinary. Inside, something that had been waiting for 3 years was finally beginning to move. The filing landed on a Tuesday. Jonathan submitted our response to the surrogate's court at 9:17 in the morning. A formal objection to Renata's probate petition, citing the recorded deed and challenging the estate's claimed ownership of the 47 acres. Attached as exhibits, the deed, the title search printout, the recording confirmation, and the email chain in which Renata had asked Gerald whether Earl had ever done anything with the deed and received an answer she had chosen to believe. I was at my desk when Jonathan texted me the confirmation number. I read it, set my phone face down, and went back to the purchase agreement I was reviewing. There was a closing that afternoon at 3. A young couple buying their first house in Darien. A small colonial, slightly over their budget, with a kitchen they had already decided to renovate. They had been nervous at every stage of the process, the way first-time buyers are nervous, and I had learned over 4 years of closings that what nervous clients need most is a calm presence at the table. I was good at that. I had practice. The 3 o'clock closing went smoothly. The buyers signed everything with a slightly dazed expression. People get when the thing they have been working toward for months is suddenly, irreversibly real. I shook their hands, told them to enjoy the house, and drove home in the early dark of a November evening, feeling the particular satisfaction of work completed correctly. My phone had been ringing since 2:15. I had silenced it during the closing. When I checked it in the parking garage, I had 4 missed calls, 2 from a number I didn't recognize, one from Derek, one from Gerald, and a voicemail from Renata. I listened to the voicemail in the car with the engine off. Her voice was controlled, but only just. The seams were showing in a way I had never heard from Renata before, a tightness around the edges of her words, a slightly elevated pace. She said she had received notification from the court about my filing. She said she was surprised and disappointed. She said she thought we had agreed to handle this as a family. She said she needed me to call her back immediately. I did not call her back. I texted Jonathan. She called. Voicemail. Controlled but rattled. He replied, expected. Don't engage. Her attorney will be in touch with me by end of week. I put the phone in my bag and went upstairs and made tea and sat at my kitchen table for a while in the quiet. Outside, the city made its ordinary sounds. I had lived in this apartment for 3 years, and I still found the nighttime noise of Stamford oddly comforting, the distant traffic, the occasional siren, the specific urban hum that means you are not alone even when you are alone. I thought about Renata listening to the court notification. The moment of reading it, the moment of comprehension, the specific rearrangement that must have happened in her mind when she understood that the land she had spent 6 weeks distributing and documenting and filing paperwork about had been legally someone else's property for 3 years. I did not feel triumphant, not yet. What I felt was focused, the way I feel in the middle of a complex transaction when all the moving parts are in motion and the outcome depends on maintaining precision. Triumph was for afterward. Right now there was still work to do. Renata's attorney contacted Jonathan the following Friday. His name was Carl Whitmore, a general practice attorney from Yonkers, with a decent enough reputation in estate matters, though not in probate litigation. Jonathan relayed the substance of their call to me over the phone that afternoon. Whitmore's initial position was that the deed was invalid. His argument was that Earl had lacked the mental capacity to execute a valid transfer 3 years before his death, that at the time of signing, Earl had been, in Whitmore's phrase, not fully himself. I listened to Jonathan relay this and felt something cold and specific move through me. He was fully himself, I said. I was with him. My supervising partner witnessed the signing. The notary was present. He read the document. He asked questions. He understood every word. I know, Jonathan said. I'm not concerned about the capacity argument. It's a weak challenge and they know it. What I am concerned about is that they're going to depose your supervising partner and the notary, which means this is going to become more visible before it resolves. Let it become visible, I said. Victoria, his voice was careful. They may also make a claim that Earl was unduly influenced. That you used your professional position to persuade an elderly man to transfer property to you. I was quiet for a moment. He called me, I said. He made the appointment. He brought the document. He told me what he wanted to do, and I explained the legal implications and he signed. That is the opposite of undue influence. I know that, Jonathan said. We have the supervising partner. We have the notary. We have the email chain establishing that Renata had reason to search and chose not to. The undue influence argument is a delay tactic. They're hoping to make this expensive and uncomfortable enough that you settle. I'm not settling, I said. I didn't think you were, he said. But I want you prepared for the next few weeks to be unpleasant. He was right about that. What came next did not arrive through attorneys or court filings. It arrived the way Renata's campaigns always arrived, sideways. Through intermediaries in the informal channels of family. Derek called my Aunt Louise, my mother's sister, technically outside the Hayes' family entirely, and told her that I had blindsided everyone with a legal filing and that Earl had clearly been manipulated in his final years by a granddaughter who had taken advantage of his trust. Louise, to her credit, called me directly and told me what Derek had said. She told me she didn't believe it, and I thanked her, and we spoke for 20 minutes about Earl, about the green flannel, about the notebooks. about the way he made coffee using an old percolator that no one else knew how to operate. And by the end of it, Louise was crying softly, and I was close. Mason sent me a text. It said, "You know what you did. Think about what Grandpa would actually want." I read it twice. Then I deleted it. What Grandpa actually wanted was filed with the Westchester County Clerk's Office at 4:47 p.m. on September 14th, 3 years ago. It was on public record. Anyone could read it. The county had it. I had it. Jonathan had copies of it. What Grandpa wanted had a document number. The most significant move came 12 days after our filing, and it came not from Renata's attorney, but from Renata herself. She filed a supplemental declaration with the court. In it, she claimed that she had recently discovered evidence that the deed had been signed under circumstances suggesting elder financial abuse, that Earl had been isolated from family in his final years, that Victoria had positioned herself as his primary advisor, and that the transfer should be investigated by Adult Protective Services before the court proceeded. Elder financial abuse. The phrase was calculated, not because it was true, but because it was the kind of phrase that makes courts pause, that generates review processes and delays, that shifts the character of a proceeding from a clean legal dispute into something murkier and more damaging to everyone involved. I read the declaration in Jonathan's office. I read it carefully and completely, the way Earl had taught me to read things before I spoke about them. Then I set it down. How many people were present at the signing? Jonathan asked. 3, I said. Earl, my supervising partner, David Cho. The notary, a woman named Ruth Castillo, who works 3 blocks from my office and has been a notary for 14 years, and the date of the signing relative to Earl's last documented medical appointment? He had a physical 6 weeks later. His physician's notes describe him as alert, oriented, in good health for his age, no cognitive concerns. Jonathan wrote something on his legal pad. We're going to request those medical records. And I want declarations from David Cho and Ruth Castillo before the end of next week. They'll cooperate, I said. David Cho had already called me when he heard what was happening. He remembered the signing clearly. He had said, because Earl had been one of the most deliberate and composed signatories he had ever witnessed. Ruth Castillo had notarized thousands of documents in 14 years and would not have stamped ones signed by a man she believed to be impaired. But here was what Renata did not know, what she could not have known, because she had never been in the room. Earl had done one more thing that afternoon. After the signing, after the notary had gathered her materials, and David Cho had gone back to his office, Earl had sat across from my desk for an additional 20 minutes. He had asked me to take out a legal pad, the same kind Jonathan used, the yellow ones, and he had dictated a short statement. Not a legal document, not a formal instrument. A personal statement, in his own words, explaining why he had made the transfer, in his own handwriting at the bottom, where he had signed and dated it. I had kept it in the fireproof box with the deed. It said, in Earl's precise, unhurried sentences, I am transferring this land to my granddaughter Victoria Ann Hayes because I trust her judgment, because she has earned this land through her honesty and her care for me over many years, and because I have watched my family long enough to know what will happen to this property if I leave it to the discretion of my estate. I am doing this freely, without pressure from anyone, because it is the right thing to do. I am 78 years old and I know my own mind. 78 years old and I know my own mind. I slid the legal pad page across Jonathan's conference table. He read it. He read it the way he read everything, completely, without expression. When he finished, he looked up at me. He did not say anything. For a moment he knew, Jonathan said finally. Not about the legal strategy. About everything. About Renata and Gerald, and the color-coded map, and the chair against the wall, and the release document with my name already in the signature block. Earl had known all of it, 3 years before it happened, and he had sat in my office and dictated a paragraph that addressed every argument they would ever make. He knew, I said. Jonathan looked back down at the page for a moment. Then he carefully set it with the other documents. We file this with our response to the supplemental declaration, he said. Along with Cho's declaration, Castillo's declaration, and the medical records. Yes, I said. Renata's attorney is going to read this and understand that the capacity and undue influence arguments are finished. Yes, I said. Which means the case comes down to the deed itself, and the deed is clean. It has always been clean, I said. Jonathan capped his pen and leaned back in his chair and looked at me with the expression of a man who has been in enough legal proceedings to recognize the moment when the outcome of a case becomes visible from a distance. Not certain. Because nothing in law is certain but visible. We're going to request a hearing date, he said. I want this in front of a judge. Outside the window, white planes moved through its ordinary afternoon. Traffic, pedestrians, the flat winter light that makes everything look like it is waiting for something. I thought about Renata filing that declaration. The decision to use the phrase elder financial abuse about a man who had been more deliberate and clear-eyed in my office than most people are at half his age. The willingness to invoke his vulnerability as a weapon in a fight she had started by claiming property she had no right to claim. I thought about Earl's handwriting at the bottom of the legal pad page, the careful, unhurried letters, the period at the end of every sentence. I am 78 years old, and I know my own mind. He had known his mind. He had also known theirs, and he had planned accordingly, 3 years in advance, with the precision of a man who had kept 43 notebooks and never once trusted the wrong person with the wrong information. The hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out. I went back to my office, picked up my active files, and kept working. That is what you do when you already know how the story ends. You keep working, you stay precise. You do not let the noise from the other side alter the quality of your attention. You wait for the day when the judge reads the name on the deed out loud. The invitation to the signing came from Whitmore's office on a Thursday afternoon. It was framed as a courtesy, a pre-hearing settlement conference, informal, no judge present, just the parties and their counsel sitting down to see whether an agreement could be reached before the court date. Whitmore's email to Jonathan used phrases like in the spirit of resolution, and to preserve family relationships where possible, which is the language attorneys use when their client has begun to understand the shape of what is coming and would prefer to manage it privately. Jonathan called me after he read it. They want to meet, he said. I know, I said. I had already read the forwarded email. What do you think it means? It means Cho's declaration arrived. It means Castillo's declaration arrived. It means they received the medical records and Earl's personal statement, and Whitmore has had a conversation with Renata about what a hearing is likely to produce. He paused. They're looking for a way out that doesn't involve a judge reading your grandfather's handwritten statement into the public record of Westchester County Surrogate's Court. I thought about that for a moment. What are we likely to be offered? A percentage? Jonathan said. They'll propose splitting the land. Give you a portion, probably the least developable section, and ask you to release any further claims. It will be presented as a compromise, as generosity, as what Earl would have wanted. Earl left a written statement about what he wanted, I said. Yes, Jonathan said. He did. So we go to the meeting. We go to the meeting, he said. And we listen. And we make them say the number out loud. The conference was scheduled for a Tuesday, 2 weeks before the hearing date, at Whitmore's office in Yonkers. I drove there in the early morning gray of a January day, parked in the small lot behind the building, and sat for a moment before going in. I had not seen Renata since the Sunday meeting at her house in November. I had not spoken to Gerald since the phone call where he told me Renata had checked and found nothing. I had not spoken to Derek or Mason at all. For 2 months, they had existed entirely as names on documents and voices on calls I had not returned, and I had kept it that way deliberately. Not out of coldness, but because every conversation was a potential variable, and I had learned from Earl to minimize variables when precision mattered. I went inside. Whitmore's conference room was on the second floor. A rectangular room with a long table, 4 chairs on each side, a window overlooking the parking lot. When I arrived with Jonathan, Renata was already seated. Derek was beside her. Gerald was at the far end, slightly apart from the others, in the same posture I had seen in Renata's dining room, present but angled away from the center of things, as though maintaining plausible distance from whatever was about to happen. Renata looked at me when I came in. It was the first time I had seen her face since November. She looked the same, blazer, hair set, the sealed expression. But something had shifted underneath it, a tightness that had not been there before. A quality of held effort, the way a person looks when they have been maintaining a position that is costing them more energy than they expected. I sat down across from her. Jonathan sat beside me. We exchanged the procedural courtesies. Introductions, water offered and declined, the brief organizational preamble that opens every meeting where the real conversation has not yet begun. Then Whitmore opened a folder and placed a document on the table. We've prepared a proposed settlement, he said. We believe it's a fair reflection of both parties' interests and a path forward that avoids the cost and uncertainty of litigation. I looked at the document but did not pick it up. The offer was what Jonathan had predicted: a partition. They proposed dividing the 47 acres into two parcels: the southern 23 acres, which included the access road and the old barn and the most developable land, going to the estate and distributing among Gerald, Derek, and Mason. The northern 24 acres, which were largely wooded, with limited road access and a seasonal drainage issue that I knew from the property records would make any development application complicated, going to me. They were offering me the piece that was hardest to use. In exchange, I would sign a full release of all claims against the estate and agree not to pursue any legal action related to the probate petition or the estate administration. Whitmore finished presenting it and folded his hands on the folder. Jonathan looked at me. I looked at the document for a moment, then back across the table. The deed conveys the entire 47 acres, I said. Not 24. We understand that, Whitmore said. This is a compromise that recognizes the practical. The deed conveys the entire 47 acres, I said again, in the same voice, at the same pace. That is not a negotiating position. It is the public record. Renata's jaw tightened slightly. Victoria. Her voice was controlled, but the seams were more visible now than they had been in the voicemail. We're trying to find something that works for everyone. You can't honestly believe that Dad intended to cut his entire family out of. He left a written statement, I said. Silence. Derek shifted in his seat. Gerald was looking at the table. He left a written statement, I said again, quietly, in his own handwriting, explaining exactly what he intended and why. Jonathan filed it with the court. You've read it? Renata said nothing. Her hands folded on the table did not move, but something behind her eyes shifted. A small, precise rearrangement, like a building settling after something structural has given way. The statement is clear, I continued. The deed is recorded. The title search confirms no subsequent transfer. The medical records confirm his capacity at the time of signing. Your capacity challenge has been withdrawn. Your undue influence claim is unsupported by any of the witness declarations. I paused. There is no version of this that ends with the land being divided. Whitmore looked at Renata. She was looking at me. What do you want? She said. Her voice had lost the careful management. It was flat now, stripped of register, the voice of someone who has run out of prepared language. I looked at her for a moment. Here is what I want you to understand about that question. It was the first honest question Renata Hayes had asked me in 32 years of shared family. Every other communication between us had been managed, curated, presented, angled to produce a particular response. But what do you want was real. It was a question from a person who had run out of maneuvers and was standing in the open. I had thought about how to answer it. I had thought about it in the car on the way to Whitmore's office, and in the days before that, and in the weeks since Jonathan had said, "We file Monday," and something that had been waiting for 3 years had begun to move. I want what the deed says, I told her. All 47 acres, as Earl intended. With no encumbrances from the estate, Renata breathed in slowly. Derek looked at his mother. Gerald was still looking at the table. And the fraud referral? Jonathan said beside me calmly, addressing Whitmore. The petition listed an asset the petitioner had reason to believe may not belong to the estate. The email chain establishes she had inquired about the deed and proceeded regardless. That's a matter the court may refer, regardless of how this settles. Whitmore shifted in his chair. We believe that the petitioner acted in good faith based on incomplete information. The court will make that determination, Jonathan said, unless the parties reach a resolution that includes a joint representation to the court about the circumstances of the petition. The room was very quiet. I let it be quiet for a moment. The parking lot outside was gray and still. Someone was reversing a car in the lot below. Slowly, the backup beep muffled through the glass. Here is what I'm prepared to offer, I said. Everyone looked at me. I will not pursue a separate civil action for the costs I've incurred in defending against the petition. I will not file an independent complaint with the DA's office regarding the estate inventory. I will accept full title to the 47 acres as recorded, with the estate withdrawing all claims to the property and filing a corrected inventory with the court. I paused. In exchange, the matter ends. No further litigation, no public findings about the petition. The correction is administrative. Whitmore looked at Renata. Renata looked at me. I thought about Earl's notebooks. 43 of them, the names of people who had borrowed money and whether they had paid it back. the green flannel, the manila envelope on my desk. His handwriting at the bottom of the legal pad page. I am 78 years old, and I know my own mind. He had given me something more valuable than the land. He had given me 3 years to prepare. 3 years to know exactly what was in my hands before anyone else knew to look for it. 3 years of patience, of saying nothing, of waiting for the moment when the room would finally have to be honest. This was the moment. Renata looked at her attorney. Something passed between them, not a word, not a gesture, just the specific kind of eye contact between a client and their lawyer when the client is asking whether they have any road left. Whitmore gave a small, barely perceptible shake of his head. Renata looked back at me. Her expression had changed. The sealed look was gone. What remained was something older and more unguarded, not remorse exactly, but recognition. The recognition of someone who has spent a long time operating on the assumption that the floor was solid and has just learned, definitively, that it was not. Fine, she said. One word. Flat. Completed. Jonathan made a note on his legal pad. We'll draft the withdrawal and correction for Whitmore's review. By end of week. The meeting ended 12 minutes later. People gathered their folders and their coats. Whitmore thanked everyone for coming, which is what lawyers say in rooms where gratitude is not what anyone is feeling. Gerald stood up last. He looked at me as people moved toward the door. His face held the expression I had known my whole life, the one that said he understood what had happened and had no language adequate to it. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Your grandfather loved you, he said. I know that. It was the most honest thing my father had said to me in years. Maybe longer, I know, I said. I picked up my bag and followed Jonathan out of the room. In the parking lot, the January air was sharp and clean. Jonathan unlocked his car and paused with his hand on the door. The hearing date, he said. Do you want me to file to vacate it, or leave it on the calendar until the withdrawal is confirmed? Leave it, I said. Until the paperwork is signed. He nodded. Smart. I got in my car. I sat for a moment with the engine running, the heater coming on, the parking lot quiet around me. One word. Fine. Flat and completed and irrevocable, the kind of word that ends things. I put the car in reverse and drove toward the highway, toward Stamford, toward the office where Denise would have the afternoon's messages waiting, toward the files on my desk, and the clients who needed me, and the ordinary, continuing work of a life that was, in all the ways that mattered, entirely my own. The 47 acres were mine. They had always been mine. Now everyone knew it. The withdrawal landed with the court on a Friday. Jonathan texted me the confirmation at 4:52 p.m. 5 words, filed. Hearing vacated. It's done. I read it at my desk, set my phone down, and sat for a moment with my hands flat on the desk surface, the way I sometimes sit when I need to let something settle before I respond to it. Then I picked up the phone and called my assistant. Denise, I said, clear my Thursday morning, the Hartley closing? She said, move it to the afternoon. I need the morning free. She did not ask why, which was one of the many reasons I valued her. Done, she said. Anything else? No, I said. That's everything. I had somewhere to be on Thursday morning. I had known since November that when this ended, I would go there. Not to celebrate, not to mark a victory, but because some things require a physical presence to become real. Words on a court filing are one kind of reality. Standing on the land in the January cold is another, but before Thursday there was still one thing left to do. The hearing date had been set for a Westchester County Surrogate's Court proceeding at 10 in the morning. Even though the withdrawal had been filed, the court required a brief confirmatory appearance. A formality, Jonathan had explained, to close the record properly. The judge would review the withdrawal, confirm the corrected estate inventory, and issue a final order. It would take 20 minutes. It would be, in legal terms, unremarkable. What made it remarkable was who was required to be there. All parties of record were required to appear. That meant Jonathan and me on one side of the courtroom aisle, Whitmore and Renata on the other. Gerald had been listed as an interested party in the original petition, so he would be present. Derek and Mason, who had signed the original division agreement as beneficiaries, had been noticed as well. I had not seen them since the conference in Whitmore's office. I had not spoken to Renata or Derek or Mason. Gerald had texted me once, 10 days after the conference, a short message that said, "Only I hope you're doing okay," and I had replied that I was, which was true, and we had left it there. The morning of the hearing, I woke at 6. I made coffee and stood at my kitchen window, watching the January light come up slowly over the parking lot below. A gray pink that looked like something reluctant, like a color that had been persuaded rather than chosen. I drank the coffee slowly and thought about what the day required of me. Not performance, not anger, not the satisfaction of watching people face consequences, though consequences were coming, not from me, but from the structure of what they had set in motion. What the day required was simply presence, clarity, the same quality of attention I had brought to every stage of this, since the Sunday I walked out of Renata's dining room without signing anything. I dressed carefully, dark trousers, a white shirt, a charcoal blazer I had bought the previous spring and worn to 3 closings since. Not the navy blazer of my thumbnail, but close, the blazer of a woman who had prepared, who had always been prepared, and who was walking into a room where that preparation was about to be confirmed by a judge. I arrived at the courthouse at 9:40. The Westchester County Surrogates Court was a stone building on a corner in White Plains. The kind of building that communicates authority through its material rather than its ornamentation, heavy, plain, built for duration. I had been inside it before, for estate closings, for title matters. It smelled like every courthouse I had ever been in. Paper? Wood, the particular dryness of institutional heating. Jonathan was in the hallway outside courtroom 4 when I arrived. He had a copy of the filed withdrawal in a manila folder under his arm and his good pen in his breast pocket, which told me he had dressed for this the same way I had. With intention. "How are you?" he said. "Ready," I said. We went in. The courtroom was small by some standards. A judge's bench, a clerk's desk, 2 counsel tables facing forward, a short gallery of wooden seats behind the bar. The walls were paneled in the same dark wood as the bench, and the light came from overhead fixtures that cast everything in a flat, factual illumination. No drama in the lighting, no shadows, just the honest, even light of a room where decisions were recorded. Whitmore was already at the respondent's table. He nodded to Jonathan with the professional courtesy of 2 attorneys who have been through a proceeding together and are both glad it is ending. He did not look at me. Renata came in at 9:52. She was dressed precisely, a dark coat, heels, her hair set with the same care as always. She walked in with the posture she always maintained in public, straight, contained, the posture of a woman who had decided long ago that how you entered a room was a statement about who you were. She sat at the table beside Whitmore. She did not look at me. Derek came in behind her, filling the doorway briefly the way large men fill doorways, and took a seat in the gallery behind the respondent's table. Mason slid in next to him, slightly behind, in the same formation as always. Gerald came in last. He came in slowly, the way people move when they are not sure where they are supposed to be. He looked at Renata's table, then at mine, then at the gallery. He chose the gallery, 3 seats away from Derek, which told me everything about where he understood himself to be in relation to all of this. He caught my eye for a moment as he sat. I held his gaze for a beat, then looked forward. The clerk called the court to order at 10 o'clock exactly. The judge entered, the Honorable Margaret Osey, a compact woman in her early 60s with silver-streaked natural hair and reading glasses on a chain around her neck, who moved to the bench with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had presided over many proceedings and had developed a precise sense of how much each one actually required. She sat. She opened the file. She put on her reading glasses. "This is the matter of the estate of Earl Thomas Hayes," she said. "We are here on the petitioner's voluntary withdrawal of the probate petition and the filing of a corrected estate inventory. Is petitioner's counsel prepared to confirm the withdrawal?" Whitmore stood. "Yes, Your Honor." Petitioner withdraws the petition in its entirety and files the corrected inventory as submitted, and the corrected inventory reflects the removal of the Westchester County real property from the estate assets? It does. Your Honor. Judge Osey looked down at the file for a moment reading. The courtroom was very quiet. The clerk at the side desk made a note. Someone in the gallery shifted in their seat. The corrected inventory reflects that the property, described as approximately 47 acres in Westchester County, parcel number on file, was transferred by recorded deed to Victoria Ann Hayes. On September 14th of 3 years prior to the decedent's death, she paused. The transfer predating death by 3 years. Recorded with the county clerk. Clear on the public record. She looked up over her reading glasses. "Is there any party who disputes this?" she asked. Silence. She waited precisely long enough for the silence to be complete. Not a pause, a conclusion. The specific quiet of a room where a thing has been stated plainly and no one has anything to add. "Very well," she said. She made a notation on the file. "The withdrawal is accepted. The corrected inventory is entered into the record." The court finds no further basis for proceeding on the estate petition with respect to the real property. Victoria Ann Hayes holds clear and unencumbered title to the subject parcel by virtue of the recorded deed. She removed her reading glasses and let them rest on their chain. Is there anything further from either party? Jonathan stood. Nothing further from respondent, Your Honor. Whitmore stood. Nothing from petitioner, Your Honor. Then we're adjourned. She closed the file. The clerk rose. The room stirred. It was 10:14 in the morning. The entire proceeding had lasted 14 minutes. I sat for a moment while people around me began to move. Jonathan gathered his folder. At the other table, Whitmore was already stacking papers. Renata stood, smoothed her coat, and said something quiet to Whitmore that I could not hear. Then she walked toward the door. She had to pass our table to reach the exit. It was the layout of the room. There was no way around it. She walked past with her eyes forward, posture intact, the sealed expression restored and in place. 3 feet from me, she stopped. I looked up. She stood there for a moment. Not long. 4 seconds. Maybe 5. Long enough for me to see that the sealed expression was costing her more than it used to. Long enough to see what was underneath it. Something that was not quite remorse and not quite acknowledgement, but was in the territory between the two. In the specific country of a person who has done something they cannot undo and is beginning to understand what that means. She did not speak, neither did I. After a moment, she moved past and through the door. Derek followed. Mason followed. The door closed behind them. Gerald was the last one in the gallery to stand. He put on his coat slowly, the way he did everything slowly, with a kind of weary deliberateness that had always seemed to me less like thoughtfulness and more like the movement of a man who had never quite decided where he was going. He walked toward the door, paused near our table. "Victoria," he said. I looked at him. He had the expression I had seen in Whitmore's office, the one with no adequate language for it. His hands were in his coat pockets. He looked like a man standing in a place he should have been standing years ago, having arrived too late to change anything by being there. I should have. He started. "Dad," I said quietly. He stopped. "It's okay," I said. And I meant it, not in the way that erases things, but in the way that simply acknowledges them and moves forward. He was my father. He had made the choices he had made, and I had made mine. And here we were in a courthouse in White Plains on a January morning, with the matter closed and the record corrected and the land where it had always belonged. There was nothing useful to be gained from making him say the rest of the sentence. He nodded. His eyes were bright in the way that Gerald's eyes got when he was trying not to cry, which I had seen a handful of times in my life and had always found both difficult and tender. "She'll be okay," he said, meaning Renata. As if that were the concern I had been carrying. "I know," I said, which was the kindest true thing I could offer. He nodded again and went through the door. Jonathan and I were the last ones out. In the hallway, the building had resumed its ordinary activity, clerks moving between offices, a couple consulting with an attorney near the water fountain, the sounds of a courthouse doing its routine work. "Congratulations," Jonathan said. He said it the way lawyers say it when a case has concluded correctly, not loudly, not expansively, just as a plain statement of fact. "Thank you," I said, "for all of it." We shook hands in the hallway of the Westchester County Surrogates Court at 10:17 in the morning, in the flat institutional light, with the file closed and the record corrected and 47 acres of Westchester County land carrying my name in the public record. Outside, the January air was cold and sharp and entirely clear. I stood on the courthouse steps for a moment. The street was ordinary. Cars, pedestrians, a coffee cart on the corner, doing steady business with the courthouse morning crowd. Nothing had changed in the visible world. The world did not reorganize itself around concluded legal proceedings. But something had settled. Something that had been held in careful suspension for 3 years had come to rest in the correct place. The way a deed comes to rest in a file box. The way a recording stamp comes to rest on a document. The way a name comes to rest on a piece of land that was always meant to carry it. I buttoned my coat and walked to my car. Thursday was 2 days away. I had land to visit. Thursday came gray and cold, the way January mornings come in Westchester. A low sky the color of old concrete, the bare trees standing in it like they have given up arguing with the season. I left Stamford at 7:15. I took the Hutchinson North, then off at the county line. Then the series of local roads I had driven enough times over the years that my hands remembered the turns before my mind caught up with them. Past the diner on Route 22 where Earl and I had sometimes had coffee. past the county assessor's office, where the deed sat in the public record, alongside 100 years of other people's intentions and transfers and decisions about what to leave behind and to whom. The access road to the property was unpaved, compacted gravel and packed earth, cut through a tree line off a local road that most people drove past without slowing. I pulled in slowly, the tires on the gravel, the bare branches on either side of the road close enough that in summer they would form a canopy. I parked where Earl used to park, in the wide spot near the old barn. The barn was still standing. Earl had built it himself over 2 summers in the late 80s, rough-hewn timber framing, a metal roof he had replaced in 2003, doors that had never quite aligned properly but had worked reliably for 30 years anyway. He had stored equipment in it, and seed, and for a period in the 90s, a neighbor's tractor that the neighbor had never come back for. Inside, the smell was the same it had always been. Dry wood, old oil, the particular cold of an unheated space that holds the season without complaint. I stood in the doorway of the barn for a moment. Then I walked out onto the land. Full 47 acres rolled gently from the barn toward the north. The access road running along the eastern edge, the tree line dense on the west, and in the middle the open slope where Earl had planted and harvested for 5 decades. In January it was dormant and pale, the soil frozen at the surface, the dry stalks of last season's growth standing in irregular rows that no one had cleared because no one had been here to clear them. I walked out to the middle of the slope and stopped. The sky was low and even and quiet. No wind. Just the cold and the land, and the sound of my own breathing, and the occasional distant sound of a car on the road half a mile away. I had not cried when the judge read my name. I had not cried in Whitmore's conference room when Renata said fine. I had not cried in the courthouse hallway, or on the courthouse steps, or in the car on the way home from White Plains. I cried now, not loudly, not the kind of crying that doubles you over. The kind that simply arrives quietly, because you have been holding something with great care for a very long time and you have finally set it down somewhere safe, and your body understands, before your mind does, that the holding is finished. I stood in the middle of the slope for a while. The cold was clean and total, the kind that clarifies rather than numbs. I could see the tree line to the west, the barn to the south, the access road curving away to the east. I could see, in my mind, the aerial photograph that Derek had color-coded in 3 sections and spread across Renata's dining room table in November, the names in block letters, the red and blue and green markers. None of that had ever been real. None of those names had ever been valid. This had always been mine. I stayed out there for 20 minutes. Then I went back to the barn, sat on the old wooden step at the entrance, and called Jonathan. He answered, on the second ring. "Victoria, I'm at the property," I said. A brief pause. "Good," he said. "How is it?" "Cold," I said. 47 acres of cold, laughed. A short, genuine sound. "What are your plans for it?" This was the question I had been thinking about since the deed was signed 3 years ago, in the careful, background way that you think about a thing you cannot act on yet. I had thought about it in my car on the Hutchinson, in my office late at night, in the diner on Route 22 once, over coffee, looking at the property on a county map I had pulled up on my phone. Earl had turned away developers since 2009. Not because the land wasn't valuable, it was, but because he had not trusted what they would do with it. He had watched what had happened to the farmland in the adjacent county, the grid of identical houses pressed so close together that the lots barely accommodated a tree, and he had said no every time a voice on the phone offered him a number that would have made most people stop working immediately. I was not opposed to development. I understood land value, transfer of title, the legitimate economics of growth in a county where housing was scarce and land was finite. But I had also grown up coming to these 47 acres, and I had stood in the middle of this slope in January and cried quietly for a dead man who had trusted me with it. And I did not think that trust was transferable to a grid of identical houses. I had spent the 3 years since the deed was signed reading about conservation easements. "I've been talking to the Westchester Land Trust," I said. "There's a conservation easement option that would restrict development in perpetuity while keeping the land in private ownership. I retain the property, the land stays agricultural or open, and I receive a tax benefit for the donated development rights." Jonathan was quiet for a moment. "Earl would have liked that, I think so," I said. What I did not say, what I have thought about many times since, was that the conservation easement was also the final move in a game that Renata had never understood she was playing. If she had succeeded, If the land had gone to Derek and Mason and Gerald, within 5 years, I was certain they would have sold it to the first developer who called. The access road would have been paved, the barn demolished, the slope graded flat, and 47 acres of Westchester farmland would have become a subdivision with a landscaped entrance sign and covenants about approved mailbox colors. Earl had known that too. He had said as much, once, without saying it directly. The way he said most important things, by placing the relevant facts in a sequence that made the conclusion obvious without requiring him to state it. Dirt doesn't lie, he had said, but people do. And sometimes the only answer to that is a recorded deed and a patient granddaughter and 43 notebooks full of evidence that a man knew exactly what he was doing. I sat on the barn step for a while longer. The cold was beginning to work through my coat, which meant it was time to move. I was standing up to go when my phone rang. The number was Renata's. I looked at it for a moment. 2 rings. 3, I answered. Victoria, her voice was different. Not the managed voice from the meeting, not the controlled voice from the voicemail, not the flat voice from the conference room when she had said fine. Something else. Something that had been stripped of the management entirely. Renata, I said, a pause. I could hear her breathing, slightly uneven. I owe you an apology, she said. It was the last sentence I had expected from her. Not because I thought she was incapable of it, but because I had understood for a long time that apology was not a tool Renata reached for. That her particular architecture required that she be right, that her management of the family depended on never occupying a position that required repair. I did not say anything. I waited. What we did at that meeting, she said, the way we handled it, the chair against the wall, a pause. I knew it was wrong when I did it. I want you to know that. I sat back down on the barn step. I was afraid, she said. I know that's not an excuse. I was afraid that if there was any question about the land, it would go into something I couldn't control. And I had spent so long being the one who controlled things that She stopped, took a breath. I didn't search properly. I didn't look for what I didn't want to find. And then when I found out, another pause. When Whitmore showed me the deed and your grandfather's statement, the things he wrote, her voice broke slightly on the last word. Just slightly. The way voices break when they are holding something that has become too heavy for the available structure. He knew what I was going to do, she said. He knew, and he wrote it all down. Yes, I said. He did. Silence. I'm not asking you to. She stopped again, recalibrated. I know things between us won't be the same. I know you have no reason to trust me. I just needed to say it. That I was wrong, that I knew it and did it anyway, and that I'm sorry. I sat on the barn step with the phone against my ear, and the cold coming through my coat, and the 47 acres behind me in the January quiet. I thought about what to say. I thought about it the way I think about difficult documents. Not quickly, not with the first instinct, but with the deliberateness that the situation warranted. I hear you, I said finally. Not forgiveness, not dismissal. Something in between. An acknowledgement that the words had arrived and been received, that they had not gone into nothing, that they had landed somewhere. Renata breathed out slowly. Thank you, she said, and then very quietly. He was proud of you, you know. He told me once, years ago. He said you were the only one who read things all the way to the end. I closed my eyes for a moment. I know, I said. We said goodbye with a civility that was fragile and genuine in equal measure, the kind of civility that might or might not become something else over time. That would need tending if it were going to survive. That was beginning from a foundation that had been broken and would bear the marks of that breaking permanently. I did not know what Renata and I would be to each other going forward. I did not know if Gerald and I would find our way to something more honest than what we had managed before. I did not know if Derek would ever understand what he had been part of, or if Mason would step out from behind his brother's shadow long enough to develop a perspective of his own. What I knew was 47 acres, a recorded deed, a barn that needed work, a conservation easement that would keep this land open for longer than any of us would be alive, and a grandfather who had sat across from my desk in a green flannel shirt and watched me read and trusted me with the thing he valued most in the world. I stood up from the barn step, brushed the cold from my coat, walked back to the car, but before I got in, I turned around and looked at the land one more time. The bare slope, the tree line, the gray sky. 47 acres of Westchester County in January, dormant and cold and entirely, irrevocably mine. I thought about Derek's color-coded map, the neat little boxes with the names written in marker, the chair against the wall. I thought about the county recorder's office, where the deed had been sitting in the public index for 3 years, patient and accurate, and waiting to be found. I thought about Earl. I took one breath of the cold air, sharp and clean, the kind of air that tastes like clarity, and got in the car. There was work to do. There was always work to do, and I had never been afraid of it. 10 months later, I signed the conservation easement on a Tuesday afternoon in September. The closing took place at the offices of the Westchester Land Trust, a converted Victorian on a side street in Tarrytown, with high ceilings and tall windows and the particular quality of light that comes through old glass, slightly soft, slightly imprecise, as though the world outside is being translated rather than shown. Jonathan was there, the Land Trust's executive director, a man named Paul Estes, who had worked in conservation for 23 years and spoke about land with the same specificity that Earl had used, was there. A representative from the county assessor's office was there for the recording. I signed on the last page. The pen made its quiet sound on the paper. Paul Estes shook my hand and said, "The land will be protected in perpetuity." "That's a significant thing." "I know," I said. It was the same answer I kept giving that year to important things. Because I did know. I had known since a Tuesday afternoon 3 years before, when an old man in a green flannel shirt had sat across from me and signed his name and said, "Don't tell anyone, not yet." The easement restricted development on the 47 acres permanently. No subdivision, no commercial construction, no grading of the open slope, no removal of the tree line on the western edge. The barn could be maintained and used for agricultural purposes. The land could be farmed, or left fallow, or walked. It could not be turned into something unrecognizable. In exchange, I received a charitable deduction for the donated development rights, valued by an independent appraiser at $840,000. The 47 acres, appraised as a protected agricultural parcel, were worth $1.3 million, less than the $2. 1 million Renata had listed in her probate petition as the estate's primary asset. But the $2.1 million was the figure a developer would have paid for 47 buildable acres in Westchester County. The $1. $3 million was the figure for land that would remain 47 acres of open slope and tree line and old barn for the rest of its existence. I had not made the choice for the money. Earl had not made his choice for the money either, and I thought it was important to be consistent about that. What I had done, in the months between the courthouse and the land trust closing, was begin to understand what the land actually wanted to be. I had walked it in February, when the snow was still on the ground, and the slope was and even, and the tracks of deer ran in two parallel lines from the tree line to the barn. I had walked it in April, when the soil thawed, and the smell of it came up strong and specific, the way spring soil smells. Not like flowers, but like the earth itself, like something that has been waiting. I had walked it in June with an agricultural consultant named Maria Torres, who walked the slope slowly and crouched and took soil samples, and told me the drainage in the lower third was exceptional, and the soil composition in the upper section was well suited to small-scale vegetable production. I had stood on the slope in June with Maria Torres and looked at the tree line and thought about Earl in the barn over 2 summers, building it himself, fitting the timber framing, with the patience that had characterized everything he did. I had thought, this is what he wanted it to be. Not a subdivision, not a number on a spreadsheet. This by August I had a lease signed with a young farming couple, Jesse and Anna Kowalski, which I noted with a quiet sense of the world completing some old script, since the original purchase had been from a family named Kowalski in 1973. They were in their early 30s, first-generation farmers, growing vegetables for 3 local restaurants and a small Saturday market in White Plains. They needed land they could count on, land that would not be sold from under them when the next developer called with a better number. The barn needed a new roof. I had it done in July by a contractor Earl had used twice for repairs, whose number I found in the 43rd notebook. The 43rd notebook. I had driven to Earl's house in March, after the estate had been settled, and the farmhouse had been formally excluded from the corrected inventory. It had been a separate parcel, properly included in the estate, and had passed to Gerald. Gerald had called me, stiffly but genuinely, and asked if I wanted to come and go through Earl's things before the house was sold. I had gone on a Saturday morning. Gerald had let me in and stayed in the kitchen while I moved through the rooms. The study was exactly as it had always been. The desk. The chair. The row of leather-bound notebooks on the shelf above the desk, spine out, labeled by year in Earl's handwriting. 43 of them, spanning 1971 to the year before he died. I took the last 3. Gerald had said to take whatever I wanted. I had read the final notebook at my kitchen table over a series of evenings in March, with tea and the window open just slightly to the cold. Earl's handwriting was unchanged from the first entry to the last. The same precise, unhurried letters, the same complete sentences, the same period at the end of everything. He had written about the land often, about the drainage in the lower third, about the year the access road washed out and it took 3 weeks to get equipment in, about the developers who called, and what they said, and what he said back, which was always some version of no, thank you, it's not for that. And near the end, in an entry dated 14 months before he died, approximately 6 weeks after our signing, he had written, V has the deed. She will know what to do with it. She always reads things all the way to the end. I read that entry 4 times. Then I closed the notebook, set it on the table, and sat for a while in my kitchen in the quiet March evening, with the window open, and the cold coming in, and the faint sound of the city below. He had always known. He had known I would read the deed carefully, and find Jonathan, and wait for the right moment, and hold the information with precision, and not be moved by the chair against the wall, or the 11-word text message, or the release document with my name already in the signature block. He had known because he had watched me for 32 years, the way quiet people watch. Not with suspicion, but with clarity. He had watched me read. He had watched me wait. He had watched me choose, again and again, the careful path over the expedient one. And he had decided on a Tuesday afternoon in September that 47 acres was the right weight to place in hands he trusted. The things that happened after were not small. Renata was not charged criminally. The DA's office reviewed the referral from the court and determined that the misrepresentation in the probate petition, while problematic, did not rise to the level of criminal fraud. She had not forged documents or produced false witnesses. She had proceeded on the basis of incomplete information she had chosen not to complete. It was, in the DA's assessment, a civil matter that had been appropriately resolved in civil court. I had not pushed for the criminal referral. I had made the offer in Whitmore's conference room, no DA complaint, in exchange for a clean withdrawal, and I had meant it. Not because Renata deserved the protection, but because Earl's personal statement did not need to be aired in a criminal proceeding. It deserved better than that. It deserved to be read in the context in which it was written. A quiet room, a desk, an old man choosing to trust the right person. Renata sold her house in Bronxville in April. I heard from Louise, who heard from a cousin, the network of family information that moves sideways through relationships rather than directly. That Renata and her husband had moved to Florida. That she was quieter than she had been. That she was not, as far as anyone could tell, managing anything. Derek had returned to his work in commercial real estate in Connecticut. I did not know the details and did not seek them out. Mason I heard nothing about at all. Gerald sold Earl's farmhouse in May. He bought a smaller place in Westchester, closer to where he had grown up, and called me in June to tell me about it. We had spoken 3 times since the courthouse. Careful, not uncomfortable, conversations that were finding their shape slowly. He was not the father I would have designed. But he was the father I had, and I was no longer interested in spending energy on the distance between those 2 things. He had asked, on one call, if he could come see the land sometime. I had said yes. We had not set a date yet, but we would. I was at the barn in early September, 2 weeks before the easement signing, when Jesse and Anna arrived to begin their first season's preparation. They came in a pickup truck with wooden sides, packed with tools and seed trays and a small tiller, and they moved across the land with the purposeful ease of people who understand what they are doing and why. I stood at the barn door and watched them work for a while. Jess noticed me and came over, wiping his hands on his jeans. He was younger than I had expected, 29, with the kind of face that looks like it is always about to smile, which made him seem like the kind of person Earl might have trusted with a notebook entry. "Ms. Hayes," he said. "You want the tour?" "I've had the tour," I said. "This is your land now." In practice, he looked out at the slope where Anna was taking soil measurements in the lower third, crouching with the same attention Maria Torres had used. "It's good land," he said. "I know," I said. He went back to work. I stood at the barn door for a while longer, then walked back to my car. On the drive back to Stamford, I thought about what the year had produced. Not in terms of what had been won or lost. Those were Renata's categories, and I was done organizing things in Renata's categories. But in terms of what had been built, and what had been preserved, and what had been restored to its correct condition, a deed, a conservation easement, a farm beginning its first season, a barn with a new roof, a father learning to call, two young farmers crouching in good soil in the September afternoon, and one granddaughter, in a charcoal blazer, driving home on the Hutchinson with the radio on and the light coming golden off the highway, and 47 acres of Westchester County behind her, protected and permanent and carrying her name. Earl had said dirt doesn't lie. He was right about that. He was right about most things. He was right about me. Life does not give you justice cleanly or on schedule. It gives you a long, patient game, and the people who win it are not always the loudest in the room. They are the ones who read carefully, who wait without losing their shape, who understand that the most powerful thing you can possess is not volume, not position, not the ability to organize a dining room and put someone in a chair against the wall. It is simply the truth. Documented, recorded, filed in the right place, and ready when the moment comes. If you have ever been counted out, if you have ever been handed a chair against the wall, if you have ever been told, with a sealed smile, that things were simply being kept clean, I want you to know this. Sometimes the deed already has your name on it. Sometimes the foundation was laid long before anyone decided to start dividing things. You do not have to be the loudest person in the room. You only have to be the one who was paying attention. Drop a comment and tell me, has someone ever counted you out, only to regret it? I want to hear your story below. Like this video if you believe that patience is its own form of power. And subscribe, because every week I come back here with another story about what happens when the truth finally catches up with the moment it was always meant for.